I think SpaceX as a whole is probably America's most important defense and military asset there is. Who would have thought that, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago, that a startup like SpaceX would come around and make a company like Boeing look like they don't know what they're doing?
You're listening to the Startup Podcast. This is a Reacts episode. Industry insiders having frank debates about the latest tech, politics, and business news. Whether you're a founder, investor, or operator in a startup, you'll gain insights into how current events connect to broader themes and trends that impact your startup, your investments, and your day-to-day operational decisions. The conversation starts now.
Hey, I'm Chris Saad.
Hey, I'm Ray Dargham.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Startup Podcast Reacts. And that's right, we have a new voice on the show this week. Ray, so glad to have you on here. You and I met, maybe a month or two ago, thanks to Jeremiah Oyang over at Llama Lounge. And, when you meet somebody sometimes and you like immediately hit it off and you're like, this guy's my guy, this guy is my person. And I think it was safe to say it was like that for both of us.
Yeah, it was mutual.
Yeah. And you, of course, run one of the biggest tech conferences in the Middle East called STEP Conference. Tell the audience, just a little bit about yourself before we jump into the topics.
Yeah, like you said, the founder of STEP, which is a tech and startup conference, originally started in Dubai about 12 years ago, more than a decade now. And then we've expanded into other cities, including Riyadh, but most recently to the Bay Area and San Francisco as well. We hosted our first conference. And really what we're trying to do is go from just being focused on the MENA region to empowering and enabling founders all around the world. But most importantly is connecting them and building these bridges between markets, especially between the US, the Bay Area, and emerging markets. And that's not just MENA, but also other emerging markets around the world.
Very cool. Yeah, I think we're really eager to have different perspectives on this show that are not just, Silicon Valley, North America, able to bring a left of center, right of center, north of center, south of center view on, a slightly, I think it's very easy to end up in a bubble and have a homogenous point of view on things.
What's north and south? I know left and right.
I don't know.
Is that a new one?
I'm trying to say it's not political left, right. It's more just like coming at it from a different angle is the main
That's
point.
all we know these days. Political left and right. There's no other left and right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's right. All right. Well, with that, let's jump straight into it. On this week's show, we're going to talk about Kamala Harris finally releasing a crypto framework, a policy position document about crypto, where she stands on it and what the future is for crypto under her administration. So stay tuned to learn more about that and what it means for founders should she win the election. We also talk a little bit about Dubai and the Dubai ecosystem and why it's becoming super important, why they're super ahead of the curve when it comes to crypto, to AI, and to technology in general. We're going to talk about SpaceX launching and landing a super heavy rocket with the Starship on top. They managed to land that thing back on the launch pad using the chopsticks. It was quite a breathtaking sight to see. It changes the game for space and the economics around space travel. Stay tuned to learn why and how that might affect you. And then finally, we're going to talk about Replit, which is an app development company who have recently launched an agent with just a little prompt. You can not just generate some code, but generate an entire app, pull in the dependencies and publish it to the web. It's like magic. It's a bit of a miracle. We're going to talk about how that changes the face of software, of startups, the economics of SaaS, and ultimately maybe the democratization of power everywhere. We talk about small subjects on this episode and on this show. So stay tuned for all of that and a whole lot more on this week's show straight after the break.
Whether you're starting or scaling your company's security program, demonstrating top-notch security practices and establishing trust is more important than ever. Vanta automates compliance with SOC 2, ISO 27001, and more, saving you time and money while helping you build customer trust. Plus, you can streamline security reviews by automating questionnaires and demonstrating your security posture with a customer-facing trust center, all powered by Vanta AI. And it gets even better. Just for TSP listeners, you can get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's vanta.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off.
All right. Welcome back. Now, before we get into the show, we're going to talk about the Startup Podcast Pact, which says if you've been getting some value from the show, you've been listening to a few episodes and you're liking what you hear, we only ask for one thing in return, which is to subscribe to us and give us a rating in your favorite podcasting app. Subscribe to us on YouTube and give us a shout out on your favorite social network. It helps us grow the show, helps us help more founders, and it helps us get awesome guests. And don't forget also to subscribe to the Startup Podcast newsletter over at tsp.show. It helps you mainline our content, get all the episodes, some bonus content, some articles and news about me and Yonev, and a whole bunch more. It also helps us grow the show and helps us distribute the content and makes sure that you never miss an episode. With that, let's jump straight into it. The first topic we wanted to discuss was Kamala Harris has announced some semblance of a crypto policy in the last week. I've asked ChatGPT here to summarize some of the key points, and at least it believes there's kind of 3 or 4 key pillars to this framework that she's announced. They want to do consumer protections, a clear regulatory framework that specifies shields for consumers from fraud and market instability. She wants to have a clear regulatory framework, clear and consistent rules that govern the crypto industry, which involved a defined legal structure of crypto businesses, clear guidance on compliance, and it's likely to be enforced by the SEC. And she's also been talking to some of the top crypto firms. Imagine that. Coinbase, Circle, Ripple, and so on. So this is obviously, super good news. By way of context, I think Trump has been perceived as the crypto-friendly candidate because he's made a bunch of crypto-friendly comments, and for whatever reason...
She's adopting his policies.
Well, she's at least being forced to clarify her stance, right? Because she's getting tagged with being ambiguous at best or hostile at worst to crypto. Of course, my Bitcoin jumped, $3,000-$4,000
That's
a coin
good news.
on the news. Yes, so full disclosure, I have holdings of crypto and Bitcoin specifically. What do you make of this, Ray? What do you make of the kind of the Trump is friendly, Harris is not narrative? What do you make of the new Harris comments and framework? And what do you think about the long-term prospects for Bitcoin and crypto in this next political cycle in general?
Yeah, I haven't read the entire framework that she put out, but I just find it very interesting how we went in a matter of years from the whole space being seen as some sort of, scam space, bubble, whatever it is. And it was everyone in the government and in politics was trying to kill it because it was, threatening a lot of things that are close to government, to now where, on the opposite side completely, where you have presidential candidates coming up with frameworks and policies and trying to be as close as possible to the crypto crowd. And I think, Trump was probably smart to pioneer that and win over, a large audience that cares about the subject and about the future of the space. And, Kamala is kind of adopting whatever seems to have worked in some way before it's too late, and try to win over some of these votes. So that's on one hand. I don't know if you also seen the recent documentary that HBO released.
Yeah.
But they also talk about the government sort of, trying to centralize the crypto or its own kind of currencies through their own digital currencies. So it's a sort of way to even do the exact opposite of what crypto and digital currencies were supposed to do, and make things more centralized, more trackable and trackable by the government. So yeah, it's really interesting how things have shifted. Definitely overall, I think, a candidate that comes through will need to put clearer frameworks. And, I lived in Dubai for about 12 years, and Dubai was one of the first governments around the world to actually put in frameworks and policies in place for crypto and regulating the industry. Both in that, when it comes to crypto and AI as well. The UAE had the first minister of AI globally in the world. So it's easier to do that in such a market because, it's quicker to take decisions and to change laws. But it's definitely bound to happen. Regulation, some sort of regulation is important in such a space and in AI as well. But sometimes, regulation could lead to over-regulation and then control, which defeats the whole purpose.
Let's talk about blockchain and crypto more broadly, and then talk about some of this more specific stuff. So the initial intention of some of the early Bitcoin people was to unbundle money from governments and sovereign power, right? It was to have this independent, purely digital, truly scarce store of value. And yeah, it's very much gone a slightly different way, I think, right? Or really a significantly different way. It's been mainstreamed It's been enmeshed in society and financial systems. And I think, as you're saying, now presidential candidates need to address it as one of the key pillars of their policy frameworks. I think it's safe to say now, and for my money, it was safe to say, years ago, it's here to stay. Bitcoin especially is here to stay. I was saying many, many years ago, 5, 6, 7 years ago, I think blockchain as a technology is 100% here to stay in one form or another. There is a number of applications where blockchain is just a fundamental breakthrough in decentralized cryptographic trust. Bitcoin, if blockchain is 100% here to stay, Bitcoin is, let's say, 90% here to stay at the time. Now, maybe 99% here to stay. It is, I think, the primary purely digital store of value that is not tethered to governments, to threat of force, to gold, to any other underlying asset. And I think it's really exciting. And then the other cryptocurrencies, mostly are pure speculation on top of speculation on top of speculation. And so, I'm very excited. I should also address Ethereum, which is itself very different than Bitcoin, but as a generalized application layer powered on blockchain is certainly here to stay as well. So yeah, it's really, I think, a very good signal to investors, to retirement funds, to capital allocators that if you don't have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5% of your portfolio in crypto, you're in trouble. One last very quick point of what you said, and I'd love for you to actually respond to this. You said Dubai was the first to have ministers lined up against AI and crypto. I've been to Dubai a number of times now. I've spent a little bit of time there. You've spent a lot of time there. Speaking of different perspectives, I think Dubai is a place that people miss. If they're in Silicon Valley, they're in Europe, they're in Australia, I think it's very easy to not quite grok how cool, how exciting, how interesting Dubai is. You have everything there, from beaches to ski slopes, indoor ski slopes, and they're all the biggest indoor ski slope,
Biggest of everything.
the biggest, the biggest aquarium, the biggest water park, the biggest building, right? Maybe just like 1 or 2 words on, they call it the startup city on Dubai. What are people missing there? And how does this kind of first mover on crypto and on AI, how is that part of that story?
Yeah, I think the advantage of that Dubai plays that they found a way to run the country or the city specifically. So, Dubai is a federal system like the US. So you have the UAE, and then you have the governments of the Emirates, which is, Dubai is one of them. But they really managed to run it like a startup essentially, and you have the leadership in the country acts like the CEO, and then they really formed a very efficient way of operating an economy and a city and a country. So that really helped in accelerating things and making things move really fast when it comes to putting law in place, putting different regulations, making the city friendly for people from all over the world to come in and do business. So it really became a hub, and because of its geographic location, it became a hub for people from a lot of different industries and different countries around the world to come in and do business. And they made it easy for people to move there. So, I mean, someone like myself who was initially in Lebanon, and like many Lebanese, I think it's about like 300,000 to 400,000 in the Emirates that came, for opportunity. It's kind of seen as the land of opportunity. But at the same time, you've got people from Australia, from the UK, from other places that went there and never left. So they didn't really come from, countries that are less fortunate. They came from countries that are pretty big countries, but they found it to be, for example, in versus Europe, where things are becoming very bureaucratic and people are getting very frustrated from the bureaucracy that's around and things being very slow, and sometimes things being very anti-startup, anti-founder in one way or the other when it comes to taxation and the incentives that are a system that's built around. So anyways, that's a whole different topic. But yeah, I think Dubai overall really built a unique model in the world where it's become a hub. At the end of the day, it's a city, and it's not that big of a city, in comparison to other cities and bigger countries around the world. But it's really playing a very unique role in the region and globally to act as a point of connection between East and West and markets And they go very, one of the really good things that Dubai goes, and the UAE as a whole moves very fast and goes very aggressively into things that contribute to the future or our future technologies. So they did that with blockchain and crypto. They're doing that now with AI in a big way. So AI has been a big focus for Dubai and the UAE for a while. So not just when it comes to regulation, but also investments. So there is the Falcon language learning model that's out of Abu Dhabi that sits under a team called G42. But also they've made significant investments through their sovereign wealth funds and AI scale ups around the world, and purchasing a lot of GPUs as well. So getting their own shares of GPUs.
For sure. And you're doing a conference there soon, right? Where we're all going to go over there with you. So when's that? Just quickly, let's put a plug in for that.
Yeah, that's in February 19 and 20. So we're actually, yeah, like I said, we're planning a delegation from the Bay Area to Dubai to go not just for the conference, but an entire week with an itinerary, both, business and some fun stuff to do as well. And it's really going to be about the group flying together. So about 30 to 40 selected founders and investors that will fly together on the same plane, on the Emirates plane
Very cool.
from SFO to DXB and spend the week in Dubai, where there's going to be dinners, different activities, and things planned for the group. So I'm really excited about that.
You might be able to hang out with me and Ray there as well. So make sure you follow up with Ray about that. All right, that's our thoughts about Bitcoin, about Kamala, and about the rise and the importance of Dubai in the Middle East and globally. What do you guys think? Is this crypto stuff really still a bunch of hype? Are Trump or Kamala ultimately going to be better for the Bitcoin community? And what do you think about Dubai and Dubai's rise in technology? Their positioning as the startup city and the startup ecosystem. Is that real, or is it a little bit of innovation theater? Jump in the comments, leave your thoughts, and we'll join you down there. The next topic today we want to talk about was Elon Musk and specifically SpaceX. Just this past week, having launched Starship on top of Super Heavy booster into, I think, just suborbital, and then having the Super Heavy booster flip over and come back to the launch pad, where it was then subsequently caught by the launch pad using what they call the chopsticks. The launch pad had these two arms that closed in around it, and the thing comes to basically a hover and then settles nicely and slowly on top of the chopsticks. Now, I think it's difficult to overstate just how cool this is. Difficult really to have hyperbole here, right? So if you think about the economics of this and the theory behind this, imagine if you take a 747 across the ocean, and then on the other side, you dump the 747 in the ocean, and everybody gets off, and that's what commercial flight will look like, right? You build a plane, fly to the other side of the world, and then dump it in the ocean, and then you have to build a new plane to fly somewhere else. That's what space was like, right? You basically threw away the vehicle every time. And the vehicles were quite small. They weren't, you could fit relatively little payload. And so, of course, we all know this by now. Elon Musk's insight was you need massive vehicles and you need to be able to reuse them. And not just reuse them, but rapidly reuse them. And so we've seen them launch the boosters onto platforms in the middle of the ocean, which is sort of okay, but you got to get them back to the land. And we've seen them land, somewhere near the landing pad, the small boosters. It's sort of okay. But he's now managed to get the biggest booster in the history of the world to land back on the launch pad. So there's no need to move it around. There's no need to collect it from the ocean. And so he now has massive uplift capacity and reusability, which completely changes the economics of space travel. Just completely. Innovation is making things 10 or 100x easier, cheaper, or faster. The printing press didn't invent writing, but invented mass distribution of writing, right? Uber did not invent taxi, but it made taxi 10 or 100x easier. Elon Musk did not invent rocketry, but he's now making it 10 or 100x or more cheaper and easier. This is a revelation. No one should be taking anything away from him about that. And they did it this week. They did it on the first try. The thing was sort of on fire a little bit at the end there, but that's okay. And everyone was appropriately going crazy. Ray, I understand you've been following Elon Musk closely, been following Tesla and SpaceX closely, I imagine. What did you think when you saw this happen?
Yeah, this is definitely, historic time to be making this, but it's not the work of one day or even 1 year. This I think this was just Starship. This was, I think, the fifth test flight or sixth test flight that was, live streamed. So, and every time, prior to that, there was a Starship test flight that, exploded or whatever, and then you see all the headlines in the media of how, how much of a failure it is. But that's not how it works. And how the way it works is that, they want these mistakes to happen. They want things to blow up so they know exactly what to fix. And by the way, with the Falcon 9, so the Falcon 9 now almost does daily operations. It almost launch every single day using the Falcon 9, and every single day the booster lands back on Earth after it delivers a payload to space. The uniqueness of Starship is that it really takes things to a whole new level when it comes to rocketry and space is because of the size of the ship and the payload that it can carry. Is I don't know what exactly the comparison is, but if you look at the Falcon 9 next to Starship, like it's like 5 to 10 times bigger in terms of size. That thing is really, really huge. So to be able to launch that and then land back the super heavy booster, which is an insane amount of engines on that thing, and be able to reuse it is really gonna take things to the next level.
Just on that, so the Falcon 9 here, it can carry 22.8 tons or 50,000 pounds. Starship is done to carry up to 150 tons or 330,000 pounds. And that is some 6, 7, almost 7 times the capacity of Falcon 9. It is the biggest, moving object in terms of, that's not like floating in water. It's an astounding feat of engineering.
And the biggest progress that SpaceX is doing, and Elon has talked about a lot, is not just being able to launch and land the Starship, but the pace of how quickly they can produce new Starships. And he really learned that the hard way with scaling production with Tesla. And to do it with rockets and be able to scale production with rockets is a lot more difficult. So the economics, and like you mentioned earlier about flying Boeing 777 or whatever, and then having to dump it afterwards. It's really all about economics and getting that right so that it can happen. There was today actually Elon responded to somebody that posted the whole Mars. I don't know if you follow him on X, but it was really interesting. He gave him a very good. I'm going to read it out quickly because I think it's very interesting. So they were talking about, kind of the cost of launch to low Earth orbit. And then Elon responded and said, getting the cost per ton to the surface of Mars low enough that humanity has the resources to make life multiplanetary requires roughly 1000x improvement in rocket and spacecraft technology. The recent US Mars missions have had a cost per ton of useful load to surface of Mars of about $1 billion. To build a city on Mars that can grow by itself likely requires at least 1 million tons of equipment, which would therefore be more than $1,000 trillion, an obviously impossible number given that the US GDP is only 29 trillion. However, if rocket technology can be improved by 1000x, then the cost of becoming sustainable multiplanetary would drop to 1 trillion, which could be spread out over 40 years, which is less than 25 billion a year. So then he goes on a little bit more, but the idea is that being able to get it down to make economic sense for humanity to afford to build a base on Mars. That's a very high level summary that he did, but
no, it's brilliant. They're using first principles engineering to solve an economics problem.
Over 7,000 global companies like Atlassian, Dovetail, FlowHealth, and Quora all use Vanta to manage risk and prove security in real time. Why aren't you? Get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off.
I've been using in this episode a lot of he and Elon and, and kind of attributing a lot of this to him. But, in just our previous published bonus episode, we were giving Elon a lot of shit about Twitter and about Tesla, and about the robotaxi. And I think my comments there stand. It seems like a lot of the stuff he's touching right now, at least from my point of view, and Ray, I'm happy to hear if you disagree. He's saying a lot of stupid shit and doing a lot of stupid shit. And a lot of what he's touching these days seems half-baked and half-executed, except for SpaceX. And in some ways, it seems almost like because he's distracted from SpaceX and the rest of the engineering team is able to execute, it feels like that's from the outside, it feels like what's happening. But whether it's him or not, that's one area where I don't think anyone can or should take anything away from what he and SpaceX have achieved. And it's quite breathtaking and will change the economics and the outcomes of the future.
I disagree on the on the robo taxi part. Mostly, I mean, obviously, at the end of the day, and I think this was, I forgot who mentioned this. I think it was in his book or something, but you have to take him as a whole. You can't like take him of the things that he does really well, and then you have to take just the individual as a whole. But I mean, the simple reason for that is if you look at Apple, for example, and after Steve Jobs passed, the single biggest struggle, though Apple like grew tremendously, after that. But the biggest reason why they did that is because Steve Jobs had kind of like prepped an insane lineup of products for them to just like build on and take over. But after that, they weren't really able to come up with really that significant new products that were brought to the market that are different or innovative. It was just like a play or build up to what he had already contributed. So while Elon is alive and at Tesla, I think his biggest contribution is the innovation and the creativity that he can bring to a new product lineup and continuing to add to the product lineup that it's there. And a lot of people spoke about, they wanted to see the UX of like how the robotaxi app would look like and how that would integrate with the ecosystem and blah, blah, blah. But everyone can do that. You have many people out there that are qualified. This is something that's been done already out there. But bringing to the market a product that is futuristic and hasn't been seen out there is definitely something that you need an Elon to do while he's there. Now, could they have done things differently or better? For sure. I think, because he's the guy that does the entire show and he does it in his own way. So you end up with a lot of gaps here and there. But again, you have to take the guy as he is. You can't take, many people want to just take the great things about him and, don't want to see any of the things that come with the personality. That's part of the reason why he does what he does.
The way I would describe it is, I think at this point, many people are tolerating his bullshit because of some of the useful things he does, rather than, wanting to take part of it or take only part of him. It's also unclear to me that his current behavior is part of the process or is him spinning out of control.
Are we talking about Tesla or the politics part?
No, I'm talking about all of it, actually. I'm talking about his product decisions and his behavior on Twitter, his hypocrisy on Twitter about free speech, but yet amplifying or silencing voices he doesn't like or threatening to. I'm talking about, for my money, the Tesla Robo Day seemed too little, too late, and was a lot of hot air without a lot of detail. They seemed woefully unprepared for a lot of detail. And we had a whole episode about that. So we won't rehash that right now, but we should continue this debate, Ray, in future episodes as more data points point out. But if you've missed it, because we're publishing quite a few episodes, one after the other this week, go back and listen to Yanev and I talk about the Robo Taxi Day.
I need to check it out.
It was pretty excoriating. It was not kind to poor Elon on that day. But the one thing I do want to touch on before we move on is there was something subtle that happened that I don't think a lot of people caught, that I think is a really important observation. As the rocket was landing, coming back through the atmosphere, there was no or very little interruption in signal, in live video feed and telemetry back to the live stream. And that was thanks to Starlink. And I think Starlink is proving to be one of the most powerful tools in Elon's belt, and one of the most powerful things that he's actually built within SpaceX. Whether it's providing internet access to, disaster areas like in Florida, or to war-torn areas like in Gaza and now Lebanon and Ukraine, or whether it's providing continuous communication to objects traveling to and from space through the atmosphere. This is proving to be a multi-purpose, highly valuable strategic and tactical asset. And I think it is actually one of his sources of hard power. I think it's rocketry and satellite internet. We shouldn't miss that trick, miss that little detail that there was very little to no interruption during, max Q and max heat and max plasma buildup. It was, I thought, was actually a little mini revelation embedded in the larger revelation of catching a massive rocket with chopsticks.
Yeah, I mean, Starlink is incomparable with anything else that's out there. I haven't had a chance to use it on a plane yet, but others have told me about it, and it's really day and night. The gap between Starlink and all other satellite technologies is just so big. It's very difficult for anybody else to catch up. And the pace and scale which SpaceX and Starlink have been able to deploy is also, very hard for anyone to catch up to. Again, this goes back to the same thing we were talking about earlier. There's a Falcon 9 that's being launched almost every day. And whenever there's no clients that want to put payload on these rockets, well, they send more satellites.
Yes.
So whenever this new Falcon 9 is going up to space, there's more satellites being deployed. So they've really formed already the biggest constellation there is. That's why we allowed them to scale the technology, which nobody else was able to do before, because nobody owned their own company that can launch these launch company to launch all these satellites into space but him. So
yeah, I mean, it's not just that he owns his own launching capability. He's also filling the remnant inventory of the launch capability with his satellites. So it's basically subsidized, right?
100%.
It's incredible.
Actually, Starlink is meant to subsidize, I think he's talked about this before. Starlink as a whole is meant to subsidize SpaceX's cost to pursue Mars.
Yes.
So they want to make all that money from that to be able to have the capital to really invest in Starship and invest in everything else that will get them to Mars.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think the whole business, the whole commercial business of helping NASA and whatever getting satellites into orbit for other third parties, that's all, in a way, you could describe it as subsidizing the mission to Mars, right? But it just seems to me like the full power of Starlink is becoming clear to us, and maybe is somewhat surprising to him in terms of the number of use cases and the political and strategic power it gives him. So it's not just a great business that you can monetize the ability to launch satellites with. It's also a strategic asset. It's also a mechanism to track these rockets up and down into space. And it's also, so I think there's a lot of use cases for that thing beyond just monetizing his uplift capacity.
Absolutely. I think SpaceX as a whole is probably America's most important defense and military asset there is when it comes to the next, 20 to 60 years.
I've asked ChatGPT here. According to ChatGPT, SpaceX operates 6,100 satellites, accounting for nearly half of all active satellites in orbit. Can you imagine? It's crazy. Absolutely crazy.
And nobody, I mean, even so if I don't know if you heard about the whole, Boeing thing with the astronauts being stuck in space, all of that. But if you look at the details of that and the bid, SpaceX was awarded, I think their contract was 20% the value. And they did it in 20% of the time. Boeing missed their deadline. It's gotten to a point where it's too obvious. The capabilities and the resources and the knowledge of space, it became too obvious. Who would have thought that, 20, 30 years ago, that, a startup like SpaceX would come around and make a company like Boeing look like they don't know what they're doing?
Well, it's the difference between legacy companies with enormous amounts of technical, cognitive, and process debt and the Silicon Valley founder model, right? It's move fast, break things, test things, iterate fast, engineering first principles, meritocracy. This is Silicon Valley culture on display. And Elon, again, you have to give him credit for some of his first principles thinking. What I was trying to say earlier, though, Ray, is I don't know that present day Elon is operating at 100%. I think he's operating at 40%.
I mean, who else is running six mega companies at the same time? But you have to remember something that's very important. All these industries that he's operating in, all of the industry, almost every single one of them is a heavily political industry. Automotive, telecom, aviation, and
Absolutely.
defense. All of these are known, in the US to be, and I think many people have tried to fuck him over in the last,
I think there's a lot of
many years. A lot of politics in it.
I think there's a lot of smart people around him in each of these companies that are keeping the lights on. And you mentioned Steve Jobs, departing the earth and leaving them with some amount of momentum. I think Elon has left the planet on some of these companies and in some of these projects, and he's given them plenty of direction and plenty of capital and gathered a great team, and they're powering forward. I'm not saying he deserves no credit. I'm not saying he's not involved. I'm saying in recent years, he seems to me to be compromised, cognitively compromised, and far too spread thin. And so, this is not to take away what he's done in the past, what his companies are continuing to do today, and what he as a person is capable of doing when operating at 100%, capacity. It just seems like he's going through some mental health issues, and he needs to chillax a little. All right, those are our thoughts about SpaceX, about Starship, about Elon Musk, about mental health in the founder community and all of that. What do you guys think? Has Elon lost his mind? We want to keep having that conversation. We also want to talk about the future of space travel, most importantly. Does this change the game, or is it just another incremental step? Join us in the comments below and share your thoughts. Let's talk about the third and final topic we want to talk about today. This is one you've brought to the table, Ray, which is Replit, I believe. Maybe set the story up. Tell us about the company and what they've done more recently and what this means for founders.
Yeah, so Replit is one of the hot companies in Silicon Valley to keep an eye on. They are a YC company. They're already a unicorn. Paul Graham has spoken about it a lot as well. I know the Amjad, the founder, he's spoken at one of our conferences. But really, what Replit set out to do is to build a platform to enable something like 1 billion people around the world to be able to build software without code. They recently launched something called Replit Agent, which is an insane product by itself. I was able to build a product and ship it for the first time ever in my life. I was never a coder. I've looked at some stuff here and there, but I was able to not just build a tool, but to also publish it and host it online. So just like you use ChatGPT, you can tell it, I want to build an app that does 1, 2, 3. And it will build it for you. It's interactive in a way that is showing you what it's building. It's asking you to check things. The agent asks you to check things, if they work, if they don't work. It's almost like having your own development team that's doing stuff for you for a fraction of the cost and for limitless iterations. Now, I used it when they first released the Replit agent a couple of weeks ago. It was good, but it had some, there were some issues here and there. It almost felt like you have a almost incompetent dev team that's doing the work for you. So, you can ask them to work limitless hours, but it felt that it got stuck at some points. And every time you ask it to build something new, it would break something else. I've heard recently that it's really improved tremendously. They recently, like last week, hosted a hackathon with XAI, and a lot of people were talking about how much the product has improved. So I'm excited to like try it again and see really the level of improvement. But I suggest you give it a try. It's really, really cool how you can even build a GPT wrapper, app in a matter of 1 hour, maybe like host it, put it on a website, create a login, sign up process for it, publish it, and make it available for the public.
It's pretty incredible. Just to be very clear, we've seen examples of ChatGPT and others write some code, like little snippets of code. We've seen other companies build tools that will kind of generate large quantities of code and put it into the right files and libraries and things. These guys seem to be taking it one step further, and they're automatically loading in dependencies, setting up environments, and publishing it into production.
Exactly.
And so they're taking it just that next and final step. That is, a pretty big breakthrough.
So the first thing I built, actually, the one that I built was kind of like a options trading tool. Because to get access to that data, you need to have like a Bloomberg terminal or whatever, which is super expensive. So I built some sort of like a options analytics tool for Tesla, specifically Tesla stock, and it worked really well. And I was able to build it and publish it within like a very short period of time. And that was the first time I built and shipped like a product myself. It's just insane, like thinking where this technology could be in a few years from now, democratizing software engineering to anyone. Essentially, anyone can go on and build an idea they've had or something they've dreamt about.
What are the key takeaways here for founders listening? The first is there's really zero excuse now for you to build your MVP. You meet all these founders who are like, oh, I'm just looking for a technical co-founder. It's just like, you don't need a technical co-founder to go build your MVP anymore. So get out of bed, get off the couch, stop listening to this podcast. No, wait. Finish listening to this podcast, then go and start building your MVP as quickly as you can. I think for engineers listening, there's really no excuse for you to not to be a 10 or 100x more productive engineer today than you were yesterday. And then you were the day before that. At the low end, I think this puts a number of engineering jobs at risk. But really in the mid to senior level, this is an incredible way to just bootstrap prototypes and help you do way, way more and way more quickly. I think if you're thinking about startup ideas and business models, I think this affects, I've said this a number of times on the show. I think this changes the nature of vertical SaaS and the business models around a lot of kind of bespoke application development, or rather the business models around generalized application development. So I think unless you are building a multiplayer experience, a massive multiplayer experience, like a social network or a game where the rules have to be common amongst all users, or you're building something that manipulates the real world, like an Airbnb or an Uber, it's hard to imagine why somebody wouldn't just generate their vertical SaaS software for themselves and for their immediate small community. So what I mean by that is, let's say you're a dentist and you need a CRM for your patients. It's hard to imagine why somebody couldn't just say to their agent, to their personal AI assistant, you know what? Generate me a basic CRM to manage my patients, and it should have this screen for my secretary, my assistant, and it should have this screen for me when I go home. And just generates it on the fly. Or for you to, as a manager in a business to say, I want a HR tool that allows me to grade my employees on these 5 axes, and I want to be able to send the process to the frontline managers, and then I want to send it to the employees, and then I want to send it to their colleagues that they work with the most during the day. And it just generates a HR, performance review software, or generates a dentist CRM software kind of on the fly, completely bespoke for you. And so, I'm sure there are plenty of reasons why some people, some dentists, some managers will lack the creativity to build a really great version of these. But it strikes me that a lot of people will be generating a lot of software at runtime, on demand, completely bespoke for their use case, their business, their geography, their market, their what have you. And that changes the economics and changes the ecosystem for software development, like dramatically, completely is earth-shattering to the way that we think about software today.
Yeah, there's going to be, I think, an insane exponential growth and new just apps and products and websites and tools. And like you said, I think you made a very good point about personalization and customization for specific needs. And I think there's going to be also a big effect on enterprises as well. So now enterprises can really build their own tools in-house. You could hire 1 or 2 people within your large corporation and then focuses on just building personalized, customized tools for your organization instead of money on software.
I think an interesting analog here is if you imagine how hard it was to produce a book until the printing press. To produce a book was extremely labor intensive and costly, and only the most important things were ever produced into books or into even flyers and pamphlets. And the printing press massively reduced the cost of that and therefore massively increased the production of the written word and the distribution of the written word. If you think about how hard it was to produce video, it took video production teams, high-end cameras, right? Editing suites, broadcast licenses, and so on. And now everyone everywhere is producing video all the time, right? And the minutes of high-quality video produced is probably an exponential curve. And I think you can look at software the same way, right? look at how much software was produced in the early days of computing and how that has slowly but surely increased and probably increased across an exponential. And now everyone everywhere can be producing software, lines of code, and running it in production for themselves, for their families, for their small businesses, and for their enterprises. And so this is literally the democratization of software development, the same way it was the democratization of video production, the same way as the democratization of writing and publishing. And holy shit. I just think we can't predict. We just can't predict what this looks like.
And the impact it would have as well on Amjad talks about, he gives some examples of actual examples that already happened before even they introduced Replit Agent, of people in other countries, like in Africa or in Asia. It's changed their life completely because they were able to make a lot of money off Replit, building things to a point where it's changed their life completely. So I think there's a lot of people around the world that will get impacted. There's a lot of smart people that are in other countries that don't have the access, but now with this, they'll be able to do a lot more.
This is almost the definition of democratization, right? Democratization is about spreading the even distribution of power, of literacy, of opportunity, right? That's what it means. And so if you imagine the impacts on society when reading and writing became democratized, all sorts of smart people who are in the mud and the squalor could suddenly read the Bible for themselves, or read and write documents for themselves, and transfer knowledge between their family members for themselves. Same with video. People can now tell their own stories, forgotten stories, or narratives that the mainstream doesn't want you to know. Also conspiracy theories and bullshit, right? And so, yes, this will, in theory, distribute economic power and intellectual power and opportunity globally. And sometimes that means that the people who had the power, the exclusive access to the power, lose power, right? So when you rebalance power, it often looks like an attack on those who had it. There's a lot of criticism to be leveled at what an Elon would call a woke mind virus, right? Extreme left wokeism. And I think there is legitimate criticism of that. But there is also some truth and necessity to it, which is the rebalancing of power between certain groups to other groups. And certain disadvantaged groups are now getting more advantage or more equal access to things. But there's also this a little bit of pretending going on of like, well, it shouldn't worry you guys who are in power. It's all good. It's just spreading the love. But no, they are concerned about something real, which is that they are, by definition, losing an advantage, right? And people, I think it doesn't serve anyone to pretend that's not the case. Because when a certain group that was used to being powerful and advantaged is losing that advantage, you're going to see backlashes. You're going to see potentially violence. You're going to see all sorts of stuff. And so I'm just broadening this out, right? There is a lot of examples of rebalancing of power, of access, and so on.
It's partly rebalancing or even transfer of that power. Part of it is democratizing.
Well, rebalancing requires transfer, right? Rebalancing requires transfer. And so my point is only that we should not be pretending everyone's going to be fine. No, people who are used to having an advantage are going to lose some of that advantage.
Of course, yeah.
I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm saying we shouldn't pretend it's not happening because it means we're not engaging with the truth of it. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, the analogy used, I think, is frames it in the right way. What happened to written media or the press, and then what happened to video and all of that. There's been a big shift from where it used to be, and people who controlled it back in the day to those who control it now, or maybe control it to a lower extent. But I think it's a good way to frame it, and that's what's happening with software.
I mean, I must admit, actually, now that I'm talking about it, you and I and others who've been on this show, we're insiders, right? We've had access to money, to engineers, to product management, to design, to the insights and the skills required to build this software. And we've benefited from the value creation and the monetization of that. And if I'm being completely blunt, this is scary to me, right? This is the democratization of my skills, right? And all of our skills probably listening to this show. And so we need to be thinking about what does this mean for the disruption of our industry, of our earning potential, of our kind of this scarce skill set that we've had. And how do we ride the wave versus get demolished by the wave? And maybe the answer is there isn't a way to ride the wave except for building one of these few companies that are going to be the sources of the disruption. So
Evolving. I think we have to evolve.
get in or get squashed.
Yeah.
All right. Those are our thoughts about Replit and the democratization of power and how software is going to become just like writing, just like reading, just like video production. It's going to be everywhere. Do you guys believe it? How does it change software? If you're an engineer, how are you thinking about this for your job? If you're a founder, how is it going to change your business model and your plans? Jump in the comments. Let us know what you're thinking and we'll join you down there. All right, Ray. Well, that, as usual, we sometimes get real philosophical on this show. So with that deep philosophical take, how can people find you on the internet? How can they get signed up for the Next Step conference? How can maybe they be considered to be part of your awesome trip to Dubai? How can they follow your work on the internet?
Yeah, I'm most active on X, on Twitter, at Ray Dargham. And then to learn more about STEP, you gotta go to stepconference.com. We're actually releasing next week, I think. It's a plan to release the info about the delegation and how can people sign up to that to join the group that's going to Dubai. So I have our upcoming Dubai conference on February 19th and 20th, but we also have our STEP SF 2025 next August. So it's an annual conference every August in SF. So yeah, look for that. Also, STEP is available on X and other channels at STEP Conference. And feel free to reach out with any questions.
Awesome. Very cool. Thank you for joining us on the show. Hopefully we'll see you much more in the future. You can learn more about me and follow me on all the social media at Chris Saad or at chrissaad.com. And you can mainline my content on the newsletter with chrissaad.com/newsletter. Thanks for joining me, Ray, and we'll catch you all in the next one.
Thank you, Chris. This was super fun.
Bye-bye.
Today's episode of the Startup Podcast was brought to you by Vanta. Vanta automates compliance for SOC 2, ISO 27001, and more, saving you time and money while helping you build customer trust. Plus, you can streamline security reviews by automating questionnaires and demonstrating your security posture with a customer-facing trust center, all powered by Vanta AI. Over 7,000 global companies already use Vanta. Why don't you? Get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off.